She thought she was too old for love, until a broken rancher told her, "You're perfect for me." Sarah Whitmore had lived most of her life in a small Texas town where everyone knew everyone. The town was quiet, surrounded by wide-open fields, dusty roads, and old ranches that stood there for generations. Life moved slowly there, and most people liked it that way. Every morning before the sun fully rose, Sarah unlocked the door of her small cafe on Main Street. The cafe was called Sunrise Corner, and it had become a special place for the people in town. The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread always filled the air. Sarah had owned the cafe for almost 15 years. She worked hard every day, but she never complained. She greeted every customer with a kind smile and a warm voice. "Good morning, Tom," she would say when the town mechanic walked in. "Your usual coffee, Mrs. Jenkins?" she would ask the sweet old lady who came every morning. People loved coming to the cafe because Sarah made everyone feel welcome. If someone had a bad day, she listened. If someone had good news, she celebrated with them. But even though Sarah was kind to everyone else, she rarely thought about her own happiness. Sarah was 50 years old now. Her brown hair had a few silver strands, and fine lines rested gently around her eyes. She didn't mind getting older. What she minded was a quiet feeling inside her heart. Years ago, Sarah had once believed in love. When she was younger, she had dreams just like everyone else. She imagined sharing her life with someone, building a home together, and growing old side by side. But life did not always follow the plans people made. After many years of focusing on work and helping others, Sarah slowly stopped thinking about romance. The idea of love felt like something that belonged to the past. Now she believed that part of her life was over. One afternoon, her best friend Linda sat with her at the cafe after closing time. Linda helped Sarah clean the table sometimes. Linda watched Sarah wiping the counter and sighed. "Sarah, you work too much," Linda said. Sarah laughed softly. "Someone has to keep this place running." Linda leaned back in the chair and crossed her arms. "You know what I mean," she said. "You should think about yourself sometimes." Sarah shook her head gently. "At my age," she replied with a small smile, "I think that ship has sailed." Linda frowned. "That's not true." But Sarah only smiled politely and continued cleaning. She did not want to argue. In her heart, she truly believed that love was something meant for younger people. The next morning started like every other morning. The cafe slowly filled with customers. People chatted about the weather, the local football game, and the cattle market outside town. Sarah moved between the tables, carrying coffee cups and plates of pancakes. But just before noon, something unusual happened. The door of the cafe opened, and a man stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a worn cowboy hat and dusty boots. His shirt looked like it had seen many long days of work under the sun. The man paused for a moment near the door, quietly looking around the cafe. Some of the locals glanced at him with curiosity. In a small town, people noticed when someone new arrived. Sarah walked over with her usual friendly smile. "Welcome," she said kindly. "Please sit anywhere you like." The man nodded politely and chose a table near the window. Sarah poured him a cup of coffee. "First time in town?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," he said calmly. His voice was deep but gentle. "My name is Daniel Hayes." Sarah smiled. "Well, Mr. Hayes, I'm Sarah. If you need anything, just let me know." Daniel thanked her and took a slow sip of his coffee. For a moment, he looked out the window at the quiet street. Then his eyes moved back toward the cafe. He watched Sarah as she spoke kindly with the other customers, laughing with some of them and helping others. Daniel noticed something most people didn't think about. Sarah made the room feel warm. She made people feel important. There was a calm kindness in the way she spoke, the way she listened, and the way she smiled. But Daniel also noticed something else. Sometimes, when Sarah thought no one was looking, her smile faded for just a second, and in that brief moment, her eyes looked a little lonely. Daniel quietly watched her from his table. He did not say anything about it, but in his heart, he already knew one thing. Sarah Whitmore might believe that her time for love had passed. After that first visit, Daniel Hayes began coming to Sunrise Corner Cafe almost every morning. At first, people in the town were curious about him. Small towns were like that. When someone new arrived, Everyone wanted to know where they came from and what they were doing there. Daniel did not talk much about himself. He was polite and calm, but he kept most of his story to himself. People only knew a few things. He had recently bought the old Miller Ranch outside town. The ranch had been empty for several years. Now, Daniel was fixing the fences, cleaning the barn, and slowly bringing the land back to life. Most mornings, he came to the cafe around the same time. He sat at the same table near the window, ordered black coffee and eggs, and quietly watched the town wake up. But what he noticed the most was Sarah. Daniel watched how she moved around the cafe with quiet energy. She remembered what everyone liked. She asked about their families. She listened when someone needed to talk. One morning, an older man named George came into the cafe looking tired. Sarah immediately noticed. "Morning, George," she said kindly. "Rough night?" George sighed as he sat down. "My truck broke down again," he said. "I don't think that old thing wants to run anymore." Sarah smiled softly. "Don't worry," she said. "Tom, the mechanic, is coming in soon. I'll ask him to take a look." George looked relieved. "Thank you, Sarah," he said. Daniel watched the moment quietly from his table. He noticed how Sarah helped people without expecting anything back. She did it naturally, like it was simply part of who she was. Later that day, Daniel finished his breakfast and walked to the counter to pay. Sarah handed him the bill. "Everything good?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said with a small smile. "Best coffee I've had in a long time." Sarah laughed. "Well, I'm glad someone likes it that much." Daniel hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "You seem to know everyone in town." Sarah leaned lightly against the counter. "Small towns are like that," she said. "If you stay long enough, everyone becomes family." Daniel nodded slowly. "That sounds nice." For a brief second, Sarah looked thoughtful. "Yes," she said softly. "It is." Over the next few weeks, Daniel continued coming to the cafe. Slowly, he started talking a little more with Sarah. Sometimes they talked about the ranch. Daniel told her about the horses he was caring for and the repairs he was making. Sarah enjoyed listening. She had always liked ranch life, even though she had never worked on one herself. One afternoon, the cafe was almost empty. The lunch crowd had already left, and the quiet afternoon sun filled the room. Daniel sat at his usual table, while Sarah wiped down the counter. After a moment, Daniel spoke. "You work here every day?" he asked. Sarah nodded. 6 days a week, she said. "That sounds like a lot." Sarah shrugged gently. "I've been doing it for years. I guess I'm used to it." Daniel watched her for a moment. "Don't you ever take time for yourself?" he asked. Sarah smiled a little. "This place keeps me busy enough." Daniel did not say anything for a moment. Then he said something simple but honest. "You take good care of everyone here." Sarah looked surprised. "Well, that's my job," she replied. Daniel shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "It's more than that." Sarah did not know what to say, so she just smiled politely and went back to cleaning. But Daniel's words stayed in her mind longer than she expected. A few days later, Sarah was closing the cafe for the evening. The chairs were already stacked on the tables, and the lights were dim. Daniel was the last customer still inside. Sarah walked over to his table. "We're closing in a few minutes," she said gently. Daniel nodded and stood up. As he walked toward the door, he paused. Then he turned back toward Sarah. "Sarah," he said. "Yes." Daniel looked at her with a calm, thoughtful expression. "You know something?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What?" Daniel spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. "You spent a lot of time making sure everyone else is okay." Sarah gave a small laugh. "I suppose that's true." Daniel looked at her for another moment. Then he said quietly, "Someone should be doing the same for you." Sarah blinked in surprise. No one had said something like that to her in a long time. She quickly brushed it off with a light smile. "I'm doing just fine," she said. But Daniel simply nodded and tipped his cowboy hat politely. "Good night, Sarah." "Good night, Daniel." He stepped outside into the cool evening air and walked toward his truck. Inside the cafe, Sarah stood still for a moment. She didn't know why, but Daniel's words made her feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Not excitement, not hope, just a quiet thought she quickly pushed away. Because in Sarah's mind, She already knew the truth. Love belonged to younger people, and her time for that had already passed. At least, the days in the small Texas town continued peacefully. The wind moved slowly across the open fields, and the sun painted the sky warm orange every evening. Life felt simple there, but something had quietly begun to change. Daniel Hayes was now a regular part of Sarah's daily routine. Every morning he walked into Sunrise Corner Cafe, tipped his cowboy hat politely, and sat at his usual table by the window. The locals were no longer surprised to see him. In fact, many of them had started greeting him like an old friend. "Morning, Daniel," Tom the mechanic would say. "Good to see you again," Mrs. Jenkins would add with a warm smile. Daniel always answered politely, but his eyes often searched the room for one person. Sarah. Sarah noticed it too, though she tried not to think too much about it. She told herself it was nothing. Daniel was simply a kind man who liked good coffee and quiet mornings. But sometimes she caught him watching her while she worked. Not in a strange way, just quietly, like he was trying to understand her. One afternoon, the cafe was calm and quiet. Only a few customers sat at the tables. Soft country music played from an old radio near the kitchen. Daniel finished his lunch and walked to the counter. Sarah looked up from the register. "Everything good today?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Very good." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel said something unexpected. "I was wondering if you've ever visited the ranch." Sarah looked surprised. "The Miller Ranch?" she asked. "Yes." Sarah shook her head. "I've passed by it many times, but I've never stopped there." Daniel rested one hand lightly on the counter. "You should come see it sometime." Sarah blinked. "Me?" Daniel smiled slightly. "It's peaceful out there. The horses like meeting new people." Sarah laughed softly. "I'm not sure horses care that much." Daniel shrugged. "Mine do." Sarah hesitated. The idea felt unusual. She had not done anything spontaneous in years. Her life followed a simple routine. Cafe, home, sleep, and then the same again the next day. But something about Daniel's calm voice made the invitation feel safe. "I suppose I could visit one afternoon," she said carefully. Daniel nodded. "Tomorrow evening?" Sarah thought for a moment, then smiled. "All right, tomorrow." The next day passed slowly for Sarah. She tried to focus on work, but the thought of visiting the ranch stayed in her mind. When the cafe finally closed, she drove her small car down the long dirt road leading to the ranch. The land stretched wide and beautiful under the setting sun. Tall grass moved gently in the wind, and the sky glowed gold and pink. Daniel was waiting near the wooden fence when she arrived. He waved as she stepped out of the car. "Welcome to the ranch," he said. Sarah looked around with quiet wonder. "It's beautiful out here." Daniel nodded. "It's peaceful." He showed her the barn, the horses, and the wide field that seemed to go on forever. The horses walked slowly across the grass, calm and quiet. Sarah smiled as one of them came closer to the fence. "He's friendly," Daniel said. Sarah gently touched the horse's nose. "I like him already." For a while they simply walked along the fence, talking about small things. The sunset slowly faded, and cool evening air filled the valley. Finally they stopped on a small hill that looked out over the ranch. Sarah crossed her arms lightly and looked at the sky. "Daniel," she said after a moment. "Yes." She gave a small, thoughtful smile. "You know I'm probably older than you, right?" Daniel looked at her calmly. "Maybe," he said. Sarah laughed quietly. "I'm serious." Daniel nodded. "I know." Sarah looked down at the ground. "Most people my age stop thinking about love," she said softly. "That part of life usually belongs to younger people." Daniel did not answer right away. The wind moved gently through the tall grass around them. Then he spoke. "I don't believe that." Sarah looked up at him. Daniel's voice was calm but sincere. "Age doesn't decide when someone deserves love." Sarah blinked, surprised by his words. She tried to laugh it off. "You don't understand," she said. "I'm not the kind of woman men fall for anymore." Daniel stepped a little closer. For the first time, he looked directly into her eyes. Then he said the words Sarah had never expected to hear. "You're perfect for me." The world seemed to grow very quiet. Sarah stood still, unsure what to say. Her heart beat faster, something that had not happened in a long time. She searched Daniel's face to see if he was joking, but he wasn't. He looked calm, honest, like he meant every word. Sarah turned her eyes back toward the wide-open fields. For years she had believed one simple truth. Her chance at love had passed. But standing there on the quiet hill, with the evening wind moving across the ranch, that belief suddenly didn't feel as certain as it once had. And for the first time in many years after that evening at the ranch, Sarah drove home with many thoughts in her mind. The road back to town was quiet. The sky had turned dark blue, and small stars were beginning to appear above the wide Texas fields. Daniel's words kept repeating in her mind. "You're perfect for me." No one had ever said something like that to her before, at least not in many years. Sarah tried to push the thought away. She told herself Daniel was just being kind. Maybe he didn't really mean it. Maybe he was only trying to make her feel better. But deep inside, something had changed. The next morning, Sarah opened Sunrise Corner Cafe just like she always did. She turned on the lights, started the coffee machine, and placed fresh bread in the oven. Everything looked the same, but she felt different. When the door opened later that morning, she looked up quickly. Daniel walked in, tipping his cowboy hat politely. "Good morning, Sarah," he said. "Good morning," she replied. For a moment they both stood there, slightly unsure of what to say. Then Sarah smiled gently. "Your usual coffee?" Daniel smiled back. "Yes, please." He sat at his usual table near the window while Sarah prepared his breakfast. Across the cafe, Tom the mechanic whispered jokingly to Mrs. Jenkins, "Looks like our rancher friend found his favorite place." Mrs. Jenkins smiled knowingly. "Yes," she said softly, "and maybe his favorite person, too." Sarah placed Daniel's coffee on the table. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Very well." He looked at her for a moment. "Did you enjoy the ranch yesterday?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I did. It's peaceful out there." Daniel smiled. "You can visit any time." Sarah did not answer right away, but the small smile on her face already gave him the answer. Over the next few weeks, things in town began to change in small ways. Daniel continued coming to the cafe every morning. Sometimes Sarah visited the ranch after closing the cafe. They walked through the fields, talked about life, and watched the sunset together. Their friendship grew naturally and quietly. There were no grand moments or dramatic events. Just simple conversations, warm smiles, and peaceful evenings. The people in town noticed the change in Sarah. She laughed more often now. Her eyes looked brighter. Even Linda, her best friend, noticed it immediately. One evening, Linda sat at the cafe after closing time. She watched Sarah humming softly while cleaning the counter. Linda raised an eyebrow. "Well, well," she said with a smile. "Someone seems happy these days." Sarah tried to hide her smile. "I'm always happy." Linda laughed. "Oh, please. I've known you for 20 years. Sarah finally gave in and laughed. "Daniel is a good man," she admitted. Linda nodded. I could see that the first day he walked in. Sarah leaned on the counter, thoughtfully. "He says age doesn't matter," she said quietly. Linda looked at her seriously. "And what do you think?" Sarah looked out the cafe window at the quiet street. For many years she had believed love was no longer part of her future. But life had surprised her. "I think," she said slowly, "maybe I was wrong." A few days later, Daniel invited Sarah to the ranch again. That evening the sky was clear, and the air felt cool and fresh. They walked to the same small hill where they had stood before. The sun slowly disappeared behind the wide fields. Daniel looked at Sarah. "Life can be strange sometimes," he said. Sarah smiled. "That's true." Daniel continued speaking. "For a long time, I thought I would live alone on this ranch." Sarah looked at him. "And now?" Daniel smiled warmly. "Now I hope someone will share it with me." Sarah felt her heart beat faster again. She looked at the golden sky, then back at Daniel. "Daniel," she said softly, "I spent years thinking love had passed me by." Daniel shook his head gently. "Love doesn't follow a schedule," he said. "It just arrives when the time is right." Sarah smiled. For the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe love had not left her life after all. Maybe it had simply been waiting for the right moment. waiting for the right person. Daniel reached out and gently held her hand. They stood there together, watching the peaceful land stretching out before them. No rush, no pressure, just two people who had found something special at a time when they least expected it. And as the evening stars slowly appeared in the sky, Sarah realized something important. Love had not come too late.